Hello, and welcome to the California Tiki Podcast, where we explore America's mid-century fascination with Polynesian idols, pineapple cocktails, and coconut palm trees. This week, for our second episode, we talk about the 1957 South Seas adventure movie Voodoo Island, starring Boris Karloff. Bear in mind, if you haven't seen today's movie, which again is Voodoo Island, we're going to be talking about it from the perspective of fans who have seen it. So, warning, spoilers ahead. I'm your host, Jason Henderson, co-author of California Tiki, coming this August from the History Press. With me in Los Angeles is my co-writer, Adam Fashko, screenwriter and director of story development for Call of Duty, Skylanders, and the Destiny franchises, including story consultant on Destiny 2. Say hello, Adam.
Hi, Jason. Good to talk to you again. Talking to you again live from the hot and awesome beaches of Los Angeles, California, where actually the sun is beginning to set.
Oh, that's beautiful. That is beautiful. I'm way off in Denver, so it hasn't set yet, but it's looking beautiful. Okay, I don't know how it is precisely we wound up watching Voodoo Island. But here's what Voodoo Island is, and then I want to get your opening thoughts about it, because we're going to hit on the topics that this movie elicits. And again, we've chosen these movies because they illustrate something about America's mid-century fascination with the mysteries of the South Seas and island paradises and all that stuff. And so we said, well, this is a good example of it. But what is it? Voodoo Island is a 1957 American horror film directed by Reginald LeBorg, and it stars Boris Karloff, Elisha Cook, and the very manly Rhodes Reason. The film is set in the South Pacific. It was filmed in Hawaii, and it is, to quote the succinct plot in IMDb, a wealthy industrialist who likes to build hotels hires a renowned hoaxbuster, Philip Knight, that's Boris Karloff, to prove that an island that they plan to develop does not have a voodoo curse on it. However, when they go to the island, they soon realize that in fact voodoo does exist, and there are also man-eating plants and a tribe of natives with powers, and at least one really disturbing scene. So that's Voodoo Island. So I want to get your thoughts on this film. Like why are we watching it, and what do we think?
Right. Look, I think we happened on it. I'm going to say innocently enough. I think that we were. It was a couple of different things. There were a few pictures in the running, but I think what was fascinating about this, in particular, is when we have our love of horror movies, we have our love of genre, and we love Tiki. And it is this, where are we finding the crossover? Where do we find these moments in the Venn diagram where they sort of, there's intersection? And I think that I remember seeing some part of this in my childhood, like in some rerun in the middle of the night somewhere, and I think all I really remembered was the island and the boats and not even so much the voodoo stuff, but really it was just all that. And in there somewhere was this sense of foreboding mystery, this sense of not adventure so much, but the sense of the mystery of the South Seas, the mystery of the native drums, the native music, which in this case was done by Les Baxter, which again legitimizes this even more simply because it's Les Baxter.
Les Baxter does music. By the way, he did the music last week too. Les Baxter did the score for Beach Party, which was our first episode, and he does the score here. And basically anything with palm trees in it, Les Baxter did the music for about 15 or 20 years, for what it's worth.
Right, and so this checks again another column in the Tiki travel log.
Yeah.
But what's interesting about this is in this period of post-World War II, this period of, the idea of adventure in the South Seas, this idea of the structured, safe, and abundant and boring life of American living, of the United States, of the mainland, versus what was out there, which was in this case mystery and the supernatural and the intersection of the unknown and this sense of I think it's even depicted in the film, this idea of industrial, like the realities of the world and industrialism
Yeah.
versus with Karloff's MythBuster kind of MythBuster. Now you can really say it.
No,
The
but it's interesting. He is kind of what's wild. I know somebody else made this observation, but it is a pretty forward-thinking plot point that he's supposed to be a super famous guy who even has television shows all about myth busting. That is Boris Karloff's shtick in this, is that he is a famous hoax revealer who is so famous that he literally has television shows about it.
he has a show and he plays it up often. So you have this guy who kind of represents not just intellectual reason, winning out over superstition, but in a very showy, public,
Yeah.
televised way, and he's hired to go out and actually debunk basically this
Yeah.
mystery. They find a man who has sort of been kind of like voodooized, and what's fascinating is, I mean, it's voodoo,
Yes.
and I mean they're taking it from a very specific place, and they go into the Pacific Islands. They're going sort of
Yeah.
that direction.
This is something that I find fascinating here. Just to stop you for just a moment, is that is, if you I'm fascinated by the fact that mid-century film had so little regard. I'm not being sarcastic. I find this truly fascinating, that it had so little regard for the actual culture that was at the heart of any given thing that they were exploiting at the time, that it's just a mishmash. Voodoo is Haitian, right? Voodoo,
Right.
which is Caribbean. It's a whole nother ocean. What they have in they don't have voodoo in the South Pacific. What they have in the South Pacific are, I don't know, whatever you might want to call South Pacific magic. um but they don't have they might have curses. Gotta find, I actually don't know that. But and they certainly have totems, and things have totemic powers, and they have supernaturalism and so forth.
Right.
but
Right.
but voodoo, no voodoo in the South Pacific. Doesn't matter in this film. it it's it's completely, unless, and you tell me if this is just prime bullshit. There is a character, just to give a spoiler, there is a character later who says that they occupy this island after having gone from island to island to find a safe place to live. Maybe they came from Haiti and brought their
They
voodoo.
went really far.
Yes.
Sure, in their reed boats.
And I guess
Across.
also had to go through the Panama Canal, which would be hilarious for the people in the
That,
along the Panama Canal.
oh
Or
my
maybe
God.
they rounded South America. Anyway, whatever. Go ahead. That's
Right.
ridiculous. I don't think
So
that works at all.
so 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 what's fascinating about it is it has these elements to it, and it also happens to have a take out adventure, although adventure plays kind of a role in it, like what exists out there and away from the confines of America and all that. And they go on basically an expedition to do this thing, and that sort of smacks of adventure, but then with this mysterious tone. And there's a handsome boat captain, and then there's a couple of girls, and we'll get into that a little bit later. And
Yeah.
then and what's fascinating, I think, is the fact that it has the sort of the trappings of the tiki elements of, there's escapism, there's adventure, there's mystery, there's all this stuff, but it's so entirely superficial. It's
Yeah.
superficial as sort of an exploitation of the moods and the feelings of sort of getting way into the mysteries of the South Seas. So it doesn't really dig deeply into that, but it provides a setting which is interesting.
That's all it is. You're
Uh,
right. It is pretty much strictly a setting. That's they go to. Yeah. I mean,
and it's a go
go ahead. I'm
ahead
sorry.
go.
Well, what I was thinking was, it, if you and I were to sit here and go, "Hey, man, what are the elements of an adventure, like a 1950s style adventure?" I'd say, "Okay, well, that's pretty easy. A guy is going to gather together a crew, and there's a boat, and we're going to leave, and we're going to have boat difficulties, and you finally get to an island and be attacked by things. All of those elements are here. All of it's here." every single one. And yet, I have to tell you, they were perfectly capable of suspense in 1957. But this movie, this movie does
Yeah,
not.
but not here, and I don't know why, because
Yeah,
it didn't really deliver on that as well. It did have, the island had things in it that you like. I mean, it was stuff that was exploited. Exploited. I'm going to use that word again. There's
go
things
crazy.
that were presented in, I don't know, King Kong. I mean, there are
Yeah.
things like, there are creatures on the island. These are not portrayed well in this picture of man-eating plants and the dreaded coconut crab, which apparently are gigantic crabs that eat coconuts, and I guess they fall on you and they try and kill you.
Listen,
I
those
and I
things
think
are
that
real as
there is a
coconuts.
thing.
They are real. They're 3 feet wide, and the coconut crabs exist. I don't know if they'll eat you. I have no idea,
I don't.
really.
I can't tell whether they were actually being presented as a. I think because the crab was crawling not very effectively, but menacingly, at least being pulled on
Yes.
a string menacingly towards that woman.
Yeah.
So
He
I
was an
think
aggressive coconut crab. Yes. It was. Yeah.
I think there was
Uh,
some aggression there, and I think it had those things in it and natives, and if you go, we've seen these kind of movies, black and white pictures that with the natives and captive wild woman and all these various things, and it comes out of a certain channel American cinema
yeah.
that you kind of you're seeing. I feels like the tail end of here, plus Tiki, or at least I'll say island theme,
Yes.
exotic island theme,
Well,
plus then
that all
also.
goes back
Oh,
to exploitative literature. British colonial literature. Alex Quatermain and all that stuff. Is it Quatermain or Quartermain? I can.
Quartermain, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
Quatermain. Sorry, I
Yeah.
think it's Quatermain. How stupid of me! It's Professor Quatermass and Alan Quatermain. Anyway, so yeah, I mean, all of that, the natives tying you up and all that business. Uh, that's that goes clear back to pulp paperbacks that were
Totally. A
again
gun
were
and a
catering to.
jaguar and a girl and a guy
Yeah,
in a khaki jungle suit with a hat. And those are all great in
yeah,
their own way. And when you consider, the rise post World War II, the Tiki influence in Polynesia and all this stuff, you could sort of see where this would have a home. At least you could see how this movie got pitched out. But
yeah,
the problem is the promise of it, voodoo and all, is something that I'll just tell you, just to spoil it. It doesn't deliver. It doesn't
yeah.
really deliver on any of that because it's really a movie where not a lot happens.
I think.
Which
Do you
we'll
think,
talk about.
Adam? Basically the process here is they gather the team, and then they go to a midpoint, and then they finally get to the island. Really, about 20 or 25 minutes before the movie's over with. And have you ever wondered if maybe we're certainly accustomed to seeing well-constructed movies today. A movie might suck that we go to see because it might have terrible emotions and whatever, but usually movies today are constructed like clockwork, so
Right.
that 20 minutes in, they're embarking on the journey and blah blah blah. It's this perfect. This movie doesn't seem to have been constructed with any sort of deliberateness at all. It just kind of meanders and meanders, so that they barely have reached the island until the end. Now, it might be that they realized as they were writing the island bits that they didn't know enough about what they would do. But I don't get that impression. In fact, I kind of get the impression that they're rushing at the end. So you could probably take all the scenes from the beginning and boil them down to 8 or 9 minutes. That would be perfectly solid. I want to shift just a moment to the different members of the cast. Uh,
Sure.
um, because
Uh,
it is actually interesting. You can watch this movie on YouTube, and if you watch this movie on YouTube, it will then recommend to you a whole bunch of other black and white weird magic movies, so that if you let it play while you're working in the daytime, you wind up with a really interesting mid-century playlist of almost nothing that bears like actual sustained attention focused on it. But
like the terror, which I think shows up.
oh, yes. Yeah. But although I have to say, you and I have discussed The Terror before, and we could probably do a whole nother show on it. That one, has a special place in my heart because it's there's just something really mesmerizing to me about
Well,
that.
less actually happens there, but it seems more active.
It does.
There's a lot that kind of goes on, but nothing really progresses. It all
Well,
becomes a fugue state.
hey, and that's Karloff as well. Come to think of it,
Yeah.
but and it's odd to think that's only about 6 or 7 years after this film, The Terror, which was filmed there at Big Sur, and it's just gorgeous. First of all, it is gorgeous. It's just a fantastic use of Big Sur. But okay, so in this movie, I want to talk about Karloff, but first, this movie has a straight up lesbian, which is something you don't see a lot in a 1957 movie. I found that other than in The Haunting, and in The Haunting, Teddy is suspicious, but here they have a gay woman, and she is completely confident in her own right because Rhodes Reason hits on her because he's already sussed out. There are two women who come to the island where Rhodes Reason is like the ship's captain that is going to lead them on to the bigger, spookier island. And he susses out quickly that Ms. Adams, the younger woman, is kind of a cold fish, and he's not going to get anywhere with her. So instead, he goes out to Winter, so-called, the designer woman who is out smoking by herself, and he figures he's going to hit on her because he has a much better shot. Except for that, she like cuts him down like hard, like really, really hard. And it is the most interesting dialogue because he says something like, "You have your own thing," and she goes, "I do have my own thing," and it's very selective and very unique. It's all of this weird like double talk entendre stuff from 50s style, but it's clear she likes Ms. Adams. She's not interested in the
Oh, and
very
she's already gone up to Ms. Adams.
yes,
It was just referred to as Adams throughout the entire picture.
yes.
Particularly by Karloff, and has just said, there's so much I could do for you. There's so much, and
I
she's,
can bring you
and she's
alive or something.
right. She's
Yeah,
saying it's really more about her fashion sense and kind of everything else, but that's not really the implication.
yeah,
you know,
yeah,
at all. And she ends up actually running from the room. And what's fascinating is between the two of them, between the ship captain and this woman, there's a lot of this triangle kind of goes on for a while of
yeah,
of this woman who is largely about facts and figures and isn't hasn't quote unquote come alive as a woman, which I kept
yeah.
hearing kind of throughout this movie.
What some
But
cra- what some crazy shit that is, boy. But I mean,
but
it's
as Karloff's assistant, and it really is just all about her being the one that helps him debunk all this stuff.
yeah,
And and you've got the two of them who are basically trying to have ostensibly a romantic interlude with her in this movie
yeah,
about voodoo, and so we get into this whole thing about freedom, and I'll even say sexual freedom at this point,
yeah,
and in the social mores of the 1950s,
yeah.
and being free out in the South Pacific, and what does that
Exactly.
mean? And that is an aspect of not only this movie, weirdly, which I could never really place, it has nothing to do with the movie, but most of the movie seems to be centered on this, quite
Yes.
apart from the horrors out on the island. It really is about this.
No, most of the
And
drama is this love triangle, and you said it exactly. Remember the whatever the social mores might be at home, if you are in the same way that if you put on a Les Baxter album in your living room, the whole idea was to feel like you were transported somewhere. Same thing. You're a guy, you go to the movies, and in the movies you imagine, man, if I were Rhodes Reason, God, what a great name. If I were Rhodes Reason and I had a boat out in the South Pacific where there was voodoo, I could just hit on women all day and nobody cares, and that's
right.
okay.
Basically, if you were man or woman, it was wild abandon. I mean, you could
Right.
pretty much. I mean, it was the jungle is alive, and everything is possible, and we leave all this civilization behind. We make up our own rules out here. But even he is running from something, and
Sure.
he's out here. You have your boat, and if you have your boat, you have your own way. And it's very much a lot of those interesting elements that fed into the Tiki influence.
Well, you should mention, he's running from something. Boris Karloff susses out that Rhodes' Reason is running from the pain of the traumas of the South Pacific, which
Of
also we've
of the
pointed out
war.
many times, yeah, that those traumas are something that are in mind for a huge portion of the populace served in the
Returning
war.
GIs. Yep.
And then beyond people who directly served, everybody knew somebody who did, or everybody had family who did. So that war affected everybody. So the idea that 10 or 11 years later, people would still be traumatized by it is only ever sort of discussed in these elevated ways in movies, because the one thing that research that I was doing last summer indicated is that therapy was not looked well upon. So the Department of Defense put out statements that were carried in things like Women's Day that said, we expect that veterans should be getting about their business and forgetting all about this stuff in a couple of weeks. There was no notion whatsoever that you would carry the traumas of like turning people into hamburger on the South Pacific with you. But movies did talk about it, so that was like one of the few places to kind of explore that stuff. And isn't it weird, Adam, that the place that we were exploring it and the way that the culture was expressing itself, all these palm trees and all this crap, looks so much like the worst part of the war. That just blows me away. I can,
Right. Right.
I can never quite grasp that. But there was something else interesting here. Beverly, so the ingenue that Rhodes Reason and Gene Ingstrom are both chasing after. Gene Ingstrom plays Claire Winter. Um, the girl that they're both chasing is Beverly Tyler. She plays Sarah Adams, and as you mentioned, she is Boris Karloff's assistant. She is essentially a computer, and in the 50s, this is what a computer was. A computer was a human person who could do a lot of math. That was her. She is,
Facts and
that's her.
figures.
That facts and figures. That's her job. Rhodes' Reason is trying to seduce her by constantly pointing out that she's all about the figures and the facts, and she's a push button machine with no feeling, and that works for him. He's the original nigger. It works out great. That eventually she wearies of his constant insults and gets with Rhodes' Reason. But she's a computer. I just wanted to make a note of that. The other interesting thing is that in what's the movie with Boris Karloff where they have the sniper at the drive-in? Targets. I
Oh
apologize.
my God.
Targets. Peter Bogdanovich. So that's like 1968 or so.
Yep.
So that's like 10 years after this, 10 or 11 years after this. Same relationship in there. Boris Karloff is a lead, and he has a pretty assistant who is, a part of the plot. I just think it's interesting that this is the point that Boris Karloff's career had gotten to, that he always plays these character who is kind of avuncular, kind of fatherly towards these pretty women who are part of his entourage, but they are not romantic. Nobody is
No,
a
he's
romantic
he's
pairing with him. Yeah.
he's moved out of that. Not that I don't know exactly where Karloff was. Bedlam. I don't know when was he romantic. I don't know when the romance left.
When was the
Maybe.
hunky Karloff? I don't know. It's a solid question.
Was it
Karloff.
was it was it was it Bride of Frankenstein? I'm not sure. But
Yes.
it was somewhere in there. But what you have to do also, Jason, is you now have to. There are two things you have to mention. One is Elijah Cook. And that's
Yes.
one. And the second, of course, just because I can't resist, and
Uh,
it's the time period, Adam West.
okay. Yes. First of all, tell us about Elijah Cook.
Well, I mean, there's Elijah. What we know about Elijah Cook, and then there's who he is in this picture.
By the way, Karloff is
Um,
70 here, just so you understand. 70 years old. If he was going to have a romance, which never ever happens in older movies, you would have to have a 70-year-old woman wandering around. But go ahead.
That's certainly. I feel like I've seen. You know what it was? This is where the awkwardness comes in. I'm gonna take a step back because you brought it up,
Mm,
and that was in the picture with Peter Lorre and Vincent Price and Karloff, which was the Raven. The
yeah.
Raven, and the thing about that was it all hinged on Karloff, who was a sorcerer, an evil sorcerer, who had
Yeah.
actually captured the soul, the departed soul of Vincent Price's wife, and to
Hmm.
then make her his own. And so really you had a much, much older Karloff, I want to say,
Yeah.
older than 70,
At least
and
7 years. Yeah. Yeah.
he was cavorting around with a red-haired, sort of vivacious girl, who was
Absurd.
sort of supposed to be the guy who had sort of had captured her, and he appears throughout this movie, and even at the end. There's that weird awkwardness where you go, really,
Yes.
really.
I think what happens is, so much of what happens in Hollywood movies we don't really think about because it's just presented for us, and we don't, like, I think you're just not even supposed to think about the age difference between Karloff and this girl, or indeed between Vincent Price and any number of girls in the Poe cycle, where he is supposed to be some kind of a viable, if threatening, romantic figure, but he's clearly like 30 years older than any of them. And I think what it is you just take him as a thing. Like Karloff is just and he's just an element of the movies, and you've
I
no
want to
longer.
say
Yeah.
we didn't. I want to say we didn't think about that probably until the '70s for whatever reason. That
Yeah.
it really that we didn't. It was the post-sexual revolution, and I'm not really playing armchair sociologist, certainly cinema
Go
sociologist.
crazy. I do that all the time, though, honestly.
It seems like we didn't really draw a lot of attention to this until sometime in the '70s,
Yeah.
where it became much more of a thing. Where at least I sort of remember this coming up in movies a little more often, like the age difference between people,
Yeah.
and maybe it was this notion of much younger women being pursued by much older men, and
I
maybe
think
that
you're
always
onto
happened.
something.
But in American cinema, maybe it just seems like I saw a lot more of it kind of coming to a head in the '70s, and then maybe this is where where no one made a big deal, no one thought about it as much, because nobody was really taking sex particularly seriously in these
Yeah.
movies. Like it's not really being for all the innuendo in this movie, for example. There's not a lot of heavy anything.
Yes.
In this, there's not a lot of there's a lot of sort of making. There's some warm up to this. It's more about romance or more about the intentionality as opposed to the actual act.
We don't know actually how hot and heavy Miss Adams and Rhodes Reason get. Uh, God only knows. They're in the middle of a campsite. I don't know, but you're exactly right. You're totally right. It's very demure. Sticking to that point you just made, I like your theory a lot better than mine. Because mine was, I think people never thought about it because, these male leads are just generic people. And so whether they're 45 or 70, we just didn't think about them because we're focused on that. They're just a placeholder for ourselves. We're focused on the women. But I think I like your theory better, which is that before the 70s, the sexuality of the sex wasn't actually thought of a great deal. After that, it was. And so then there's a literalness that comes in, and you go, hang on, why the hell is Roger Moore running around with Tanya Roberts? She is literally like
Ah,
45
yes.
years younger than him. Yeah, like that makes no sense at all if you knew somebody like that. If we walked out, to like I don't know, the bar at the Hyatt Regency, and your friend who was 60 years old was seriously trying to pick up a 25-year-old, we we
Yeah,
we
you'd be
we
like,
would be appalled. So yeah, so yes, but 1957, it's a more innocent time. And having said that, this movie doesn't bother with all that anyway. They know that Boris Karloff is not in this one a meaningful romantic lead. He is just, he's got his own.
his whole thing, right, is it all rests on him, which is that he is a debunker. In fact, it's the entire spine of the movie. This
Yeah.
wealthy hotel owner wants to open this hotel on an island. The people that he sends, the advanced team he sends in, none of them come out except one guy, and he basically he is in a trance.
Yes.
And then these people are sent to debunk this, and they take with them actually the guy who had been recovered the first time.
Yeah.
But they meet up with Elijah Cook, and getting back to Elijah Cook, he's a guy who was on the island or on a nearby island, a sort of a what would you call him? He's a functionary of some sort. But what's interesting is, they're going to make their way to this next sort of very mysterious island.
Yes.
And he is somebody who at first is wants no part of any of this. But interestingly enough, is attracted by first of all Karloff's promise of it, once this thing gets debunked, this man will be famous. The man who is putting up the money for the hotel will make sure that the island is maybe even named after him.
Right.
And so there's fortune involved, and so he goes from a guy who is very insular. I would even say he reflected maybe American mores once upon a time, very
You're talking
insular.
about Elisha Cook? The
Elijah Cook, and
yeah.
then actually because of the promise of money, he immediately offers to take them to the island and do kind of whatever to really
Yes.
sort of to join. And what he says a very interesting thing, which is he says we'll make a new. He's dressed in sort of foraging clothes and whatever else. He says we'll make a new empire
Yeah.
of the entire Pacific, across the entire Pacific. So he's already thinking about. Again, it's the Pacific, so we're going to drive out, we bring order and sort of and commerce and in the process, fame and fortune. Basically, we're going to conquer basically the islands of the Pacific, and that was such an interesting thing for him to say.
Yes.
After the promise of money, he came very very quickly. But again, it's also that idea of the wilds of the Pacific could be brought to bear, can be brought
Yes.
underfoot with American initiative and ingenuity, and it was just an interesting thing for him to say, and he becomes part of this this expedition and joins up to take them to this island, which when they get there is very late in the movie, and I feel like we've seen
Yes.
a lot of everything unfold before we finally get there. There are man-eating plants, which, Jason, I'm going to let you talk about the most disturbing scene in the movie.
Okay.
But these coconut crabs, which, though real, though occurring in real life, seriously doubt that they're anything like what we saw in this movie.
No, I agree.
There are an interesting thing where there is a scene where remind me, Winter, yes, the woman.
Winter goes, the woman who tried
The
to pick up
designer.
on Miss Adams,
Right, she
she
decides to go
goes,
skinny
she
dipping.
goes,
Like,
did she go skinny dipping? If so, I completely missed that she was supposed to be skinny dipping. I thought she was just wearing a white bathing suit. I'm not trying to be
and she might
stupid.
have been, and maybe but she did that thing or it's her underwear. But she's
Whatever.
entirely.
Yeah.
Wait, let's back up again. So Ms. Winter does the thing that you do when you're out in the jungle, which is when you see a waterfall and a lagoon of some sort inside the island, you immediately cast off your clothes and you run off alone and you dive into the water. I'm like, what a very tiki thing to do.
I agree with you.
But the problem is, in this particular island, it attracts apparently man-eating plants. Terrible. Not since that Lugosi picture with the octopus have I seen worse tentacles grab her, and they actually kill her.
Yes.
Which is not, weirdly enough, the most gruesome part of this movie. But it is the first body, and there's some action, which means that the instinct when you're on an island to then throw off your clothes and run with a wild abandon and go ski dipping is actually the worst thing you could possibly do. This is where horror movie of going off alone and ski dipping and the intersection between that and the island influence or the Polynesian influence of running and going native. This intersection, these things do not mix. They lead to basically a body, and that's what this combination yields. And she dies. They find her, and I think they say they're going to bury her, which made me just go, "I'm sorry, you're going to bury her on the island?" I was like, "What?" But okay, And then
she's the art director. Isn't that hilarious? She's the designer that they're bringing. She's the one who has an eye for like placement and where the hotel stuff can go, and also the colors and all that stuff. She dies. Yeah, they're gonna bury her on the island.
And that's gonna be it. And meanwhile, the one of the legs of the triangle is now gone, which leaves sort of which he's the same guy from This Island Earth, right?
I think. Well, the thing is, there's two of these men. There's Rhodes Reason, who was in King Kong Escapes Was he in This Island Earth? Maybe. And then there's Rex Reason, who was okay. Rex Reason was in This Island Earth. Rhodes Reason was in King Kong Escapes. They look alike and they sound alike, for what it's worth.
They
They're
sound very much alike, and this is not this Island Earth, because I swear when I heard his voice, I was like, it's the same guy from this Island Earth.
I'm telling you, Rex, that's Rex Reason. That guy is just 2 years older than this guy. They look the same. They sound the same. It is really bizarre. I mean,
That's
just think that.
that's that. It's like a dead ringers take
It is
on
truly
basically.
wild. I would love to see if somebody could do. Can you imagine like a television series, like an Amazon television series about Rhodes and Rex Reason, just like tooling around Hollywood in the late 1950s
Oh
and
my
like,
God! It's like somewhere between The Prestige
yes,
and this very strange, somewhere between Mad Men and The Prestige, with these two guys who look alike and sound alike and have similar names in
yes.
Hollywood tooling around, but they're never really occurring at the same place in the same time, which is kind of fascinating.
Well, they're
We should get right
brothers.
to
They
work
are
on this.
literal brothers, and so I don't even understand. I don't know anything about the Reason brothers. I don't know how they wound up in Hollywood. I don't know why exactly they were in all these movies, but nobody remembers they exist. That's strange. Don't you think that's really rather odd?
I did
That
quite honestly, I didn't realize they were brothers, so you've got me on that one.
Yeah, no, they are Rhodes and Rex Reason are brothers who were both starring in movies as hunky manly men in the late 50s, and I challenge you to find anybody who knows either of these guys. You nailed it where you're like, "Oh, This Island Earth." Yeah, no, good. That one you could kind of, and that'll have to count for both of them. Because really honestly, if you've seen one of them, you've seen both of them. They're like
Which is what,
they're
what their parents said, which is so funny.
so
All right. So we have one dead designer, one dead lesbian designer. We got that,
yes.
and
And
we have
And
Elijah
we should
Cook, which
talk
we talked
about
about.
the one scary scene and then wrap it up. So there is actually a super scary scene, which is one of the characters, just one of the random whiny parts of the expedition goes out. He's wandering and he spots two native girls who are playing by the water. Now it's mysterious because at this point we don't really know for sure that there are natives. They have hints about it, but we're not sure. But now he spots these two native girls, and by native girls, I don't mean hot native girls. I mean like 8-year-old native girls who are like, scampering and laughing and stuff. And so picture this like 7 or 8-year-old in her little dress, and then she wanders over by this Venus flytrap kind of thing that's like 4 feet tall, and so she steps into it, and it's giant like plant arms just sort of fly up around her and just starts eating her, and I was like, holy mackerel, this movie just had a plant eat a child, and it is deeply disturbing and weird. It's like
And
so
actually, we stay on it
inspired.
for a long time. We
Yes.
cut back to it, and it's still just sort of munching. It's sort of like she's struggling in there. It's kind of terrible. I would say
Yeah.
it's not so much scary as it is just sort of striking, shocking. And there's
Yes.
one guy who is just looking at it, and they keep cutting back to him. And it's almost like he's doing double takes, but he's sort of in trance. And as he looks at it, we're basically, I think, watching his mind break as he
Yeah.
goes into a trance. I guess sort of like the guy from the beginning of the picture, who
Yeah.
he just kind of he just looks off sort of in the middle distance, and he just kind of
Yeah.
it just breaks him. And I mean, we cut back to this for probably, I mean, no joke, 20 or 30 seconds of
It's a long
footage. I think
sequence. I was
it's
shocked by it. That was truly wild, and it's not shocking. Like I don't think it should be long. I'm just thinking like this is a really disturbing moment, and it is on a whole other level from the entire rest of the movie. You could the rest of the movie is just ham-fisted and silly. This moment is really scary and
I think they
and
had to
gut.
make good. They had to make good on the man eating plants, but they probably weren't big enough, and so they were like, "Well, we can put a child." And we saw some of the natives earlier. but what they're doing is they're hiding inside of bushes and stuff. We don't really see a lot of them. We just sort of
God,
there's the sense
yeah.
of they're there, but they sort of stick their heads out of bushes and they stick them back in again before anybody. So they're hiding in plain sight throughout at least part of this movie while they've landed, and you really only see these cavorting two girls, and one of them gets eaten, and then then the cat's out of the bag. Then the natives are sort of they're out at some point, and they actually
Well,
get
right
a.
away, it's right after the plant eating the girl. The natives decide they're going to kidnap all of the expedition and haul them to their headquarters, for want of a better word, where a Swedish man, I think he's Swedish, addresses them and tells them, this is a spoiler, he's like, yes, we are voodoo using natives, and we've been wandering around looking for a place to be. This is our home. Get out of here. And
Is he intentionally Swedish?
I I don't know. There's no First of all, let's think of this for a second. There is literally not a snowball's chance in hell that he would be made Swedish so that the movie could be racially sensitive. That is not possible. Not for the 50s.
Here's
So
what we're gonna do.
he's just randomly Swedish is what he is. I think, they're like, I can't explain it at all. This actor, by the way, is Friedrich von Liederber. He is actually Austrian. I'm sorry. I apologize. He is not Swedish. He is Austrian. And he is this striking skeletal blonde man who is. It makes no sense at all. But whatever. He's in charge of this tribe. They've been
All right,
wandering
all right. So
the
he's
island.
been going. They've been going from island to island, looking for a place to largely be left alone. It sounds like, and we still have Karloff saying, there's no mystery here. There's no voodoo. There's no anything. He's still taking that
Yes.
tone. And I think don't they basically say, look, we're gonna have to hold you because you're gonna tell people about us and about the
Yeah.
island and whatever else. We can't have that, so we're gonna keep you in this hut and decide your fate.
So is it that, forgive me, but my brain melted by this time, and I've seen it, and yet I can't remember what happens. Somehow they wind up outside, and one of the expeditioners
I
falls to their
I
death.
think what happens is, and I saw it recently, and I'm gonna try and it's like the Terror. I'm
Yeah.
going to now try and tell you what happens, and I think it's something like this. I think what happens is they're tied together by twine inexplicably
Yeah.
in this hut. I think, and the idea is that none of them. So not so they can't just get away, but so they'll know that none of them that no one will sneak off in the middle of the night and without disturbing the others. And yet somehow when they wake up in the morning, Elijah Cook is gone, and in his place is a voodoo doll. I think this is correct. And
Yeah.
and they go charging off. They all cut their bonds with him. And they go charging off after him, and they find him. Is this right? I think so. And they
I
find him I want to say on a bridge.
Oh yeah, there's a rope bridge. Yes. Yes.
They find him on the bridge, and he was like, he was going to tell the secret. He was going to do this thing,
Oh
and
yes.
then he has a trance-like moment where like the voodoo comes upon him, and then he falls from the bridge. It's not very high, but he falls from the bridge, and he apparently dies. And I think what happens after that, and you're going to have to remember for me, I think what happens after that, terrible wrap up, I'm sorry, is that Karloff goes to the Austrian chief, not the
Yeah.
Austrian chef, the Austrian chief of this tribe, and says, I came here a skeptic. I came here a skeptic, and
Yes,
now
indeed.
I believe truly that your voodoo can reach us anywhere in the world. Something like that, where he goes,
Right.
he's a believer. He came as a
Yeah, you got
skeptic,
this
and
part
he
right.
became
Yes,
a
yes.
believer.
And
And they go,
Austrian chief
and
says, "Okay, then."
goes, okay, and they take him to the boat, and they put him on the boat, and they send him away. And I think that's the end.
That's the end. So basically, yes, you said it
Kind of
exactly
rushed
right.
there.
Elisha Cook dies, and then having made that demonstration, the Austrian voodoo chief lets them go, and I gotta mention, by the way, when Elisha Cook, who was so wonderful as the dweeby guy in practically everything, but in House on Haunted Hill,
Yeah, yeah.
when he falls to his death, so called, I really honestly swear to God believed he was going to get eaten by an alligator, and the way that Boris Karloff
Oh yeah.
reacts, like, I really thought that we were going to have cutaways to an alligator. We didn't have cutaways to an alligator, but I will go to my grave thinking that chances are somebody just forgot to put a cutaway to an
I
alligator
think they
in there.
ran out of money in there somewhere. I think what happened maybe is all this was changed in the editing room where there was, they didn't want to spend a lot of time outside because that was expensive. So,
Yes.
but they had a lot of stuff, on the sets, and that's where all the most of the picture is. But when they finally started doing all this stuff, it was like we only have so many exterior shots. We'll put in some file footage of, of alligators or some other terrible thing, whether it's whatever the monster du jour they were going to stick in there was, and they were like, "Nah, we can't do it. It's just going to fall 15 feet and it'll be fine."
You know how this would work, by the way. You don't even have to show the alligator eating Elijah Cook. You show Elijah Cook fall in the water. Just picture this with me. Elijah Cook falls in the water, cut away, stock footage, an alligator comes off the bank, and then cut to Boris
Oh,
Karloff going,
the death roll. Oh, yeah, and the death roll
and
of
a Wilhelm scream.
and I think that might have really been maybe even what they were going to do, but they didn't
Yeah.
really do that.
By the
I
way, I
think
can
it just
swear
got
I've seen that stock footage so clearly in my head of the alligator coming off the bank. So clearly can I see that in my head that I have a feeling I've seen it like in like 10 or 12 different movies. I
every
swear.
Tarzan picture, every Tarzan picture, every
Yes.
Tarzan.
I think Ron Ely was chased by at least one of the of these stock
With
footage
the Wilhelm
alligators.
scream, it was all in there, and they used the Wilhelm scream weirdly enough in, I think, if I remember correctly. No, I am correct, in Temple of Doom.
They did. They did indeed. Yes. Yeah.
And the alligators coming off if not off the bank, then certainly during the death roll,
Uh,
eating something as they were carving their way through, hashashin,
yeah. All
or
the people that
thuggy.
get
They were thuggy.
thrown off a rope bridge. Absolutely. Yeah.
Right.
So okay. So that is Voodoo Island, and we have actually discussed a number of the themes in this film. It's very possible we've discussed Voodoo Island more than anyone has discussed Voodoo Island in 15 years. I would venture to guess. I'm really glad that we did. I have no idea what we're going to talk about next. It's hard to come back from Voodoo Island, but we'll come up with something.
We'll find a way. I think Voodoo Island happened at an interesting time. Was set up, I think, in an interesting way, and it certainly made a kind of picture.
Yeah.
I could see pieces of it were there, and I'm not saying that it was it was going to be anything more than maybe an exploitative kind of movie about just a regular, not even really a horror show, but like just a voodoo picture, but just the idea that that the setup was that it was in the South Pacific, and there was mystery, and there was voodoo, and there was magic and mysticism and the occult and all this stuff, and American reason and ingenuity and commerce intruding on and prevailing, the
Yeah.
idea that would prevail upon this thing where, and then with this ancient mystery, or this impenetrable mystery of the islands, and yet also it had a calling for people on boats who would adventure on the islands and lose themselves, and then also with wild abandon run through the islands, and all this stuff, that these competing elements were all in this, and yet it had a setup. It didn't really exactly resolve into anything.
Yeah.
It's disappointing, but I think it had the trappings of something that I thought was certainly kind of interesting. And it's one of those things that when you talk about it, like when it happened and what it was, and the kind of things that it touched on, I think it looks good on paper, maybe even
Hmm.
more so than when you actually do watch the movie. So I'm glad that it probably is on a variety of lists. If you were to look up like Tiki and horror, or just Tiki movies or whatever, it probably would fall into one of these categories. I think people probably remember it somewhere. It's kind
Absolutely.
of amazing that it's on YouTube. But I think that this is just one of those places where the intersection of genre and Tiki kind of resolve, and it's just interesting to see. I'm glad we talked about it, and I'm glad I saw it again. It was fascinating to kind of see Not so much even what was there, but what wasn't there, and maybe why. But still, I think it's an interesting snapshot of the time and the kind of movies that were being made then, and why.
Absolutely. Yeah,
And
and
Baxter.
well, I mean, just picture, 1957, you go out to see this movie. I think very possibly you don't expect much from it, except for that it certainly fits completely within the culture. That's, it's, in other words, there's nothing surprising about this movie, but that's part of why it's worth talking about,
Might have
is
been
that
great
it's,
drive-in fare, right? You just
oh
kind of go,
yeah,
this is great
my God.
drive-in fare,
Yeah,
and
because you
that
always
was
want a
kind of
drive-in movie to be a little bit boring. That's
right.
yes, absolutely. So fantastic, Adam. Thank you for joining me again. This is such a fun summer exercise going through these
Totally.
films. So it's going to be a fun couple of days while we discuss what the next movie is going to be. But have a fantastic evening. I will talk to you soon.
Thanks. You too. Good night.
Bye.